and welcome. You're listening to the Just Love Them podcast. I'm your host, Shiree Best. I want to thank all my listeners who rate and review my podcast. This really helps get the information out there and helps more people to see it. I have had quite a few people reach out to me and say they can figure out how to rate it. So I'm going to tell you one way today, and then another time I'll tell you another way. But this is for the Apple podcast. Maybe next time I'll do Spotify, but this is for Apple. So if you have an Apple and you're listening to it on an app, likely on your phone, what you need to do is you go into that Apple app it's called podcast, and it's a little purple one with like a little dot and a line. And you're open the app. And sometimes, like my podcast or other podcasts that you may listen to, the picture of that will pop up. But what you're going to do is actually go into the search bar. Even though you can see it right there, you got to go into the search bar. Apple doesn't make it super user friendly. Go to the search bar. It should be right there. And you're going to search Just Love Them. Then my picture will come out again. And when it does, you click on it. It will show you like a picture of me, a bunch of episodes. If you scroll down past the episodes, it's going to show you, then it's going to give you a rating. Like, you know how like on Amazon or something, it will show you like all the 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars. Then if you scroll down past that, it will have people's comments that they've left. And there will be a little tab that says write a review. So that's how you do it. You got to actually, even though it might come up, you got to search for it, then click on it, then scroll down. Then you can either read reviews, you can leave a rating up to 5 stars, or you can write a review. And if you write a review, I may share it here on this podcast. I want to share one by Jeannie V that she left me. She says, Shiree shares true principles that will bring families closer together. She has lots of leadership experience, and I always enjoy learning from her. This podcast is very timely and just what many folks need to hear to strengthen their families. Thank you so much for that, Jeannie. It was a bad time in my life. My husband had been out of work for almost 2 years, and I was literally operating and living in a state of fear. Fear that we would not be able to pay the mortgage, fear that the electricity and the gas would be shut off and we wouldn't have a way to heat our home, fear that we would be able to buy food, fear that there would be no Christmas for the children that year, fear that we would lose our house, fear that we wouldn't be able to meet our children's needs. It was a scary time for me. I woke up every morning with a knot in my stomach. Life was pretty miserable for me. I tried to paint a smile on my face and hide it from my kids, but inside my stomach was constantly churning. Now, you might say that I wasn't living in faith, and you'd be right. I was trying. I truly was. But the size of the trial was so much bigger than the amount of faith I possessed, and I was operating in a deficit. It was a time of great stretching, refinement, and growth for me, and it was immensely painful. One Sunday, I'm sitting in a large church congregation addressed by what's called in our church a stake president. His talk was on gratitude. I've heard a lot about gratitude before, practiced it, done it. We probably all have. And perhaps normally I would not have paid such close attention to what he was saying. But I'm in a desperate place, looking for answers to keep my head above water. And so, as he speaks, I listen intently for anything that can give me emotional relief from the pain of the trial I'm experiencing. He talks about radical gratitude and how it has changed his perspective on life. He tells several stories about how his life was changed by practicing radical gratitude. He looks into the congregation and tells us that our situation might not change, but our perception about our situation will, and that will change everything. I feel a little tingle go through me. Maybe this actually could help me. Something needs to change. I feel like I'm drowning. I realize that I have nothing to lose by trying this. I listen closely as he describes how to practice radical gratitude. He tells us to think of 3 things that we're grateful for every single day. And you can never repeat the same thing twice. I write down the instructions in my notebook and I resolve to try it. I decide that I'm going to habit stack radical gratitude with my morning prayer. So the next morning, I kneel to pray. The first thing I do is think of 3 things I'm grateful for: my husband, my kids, my health. That was easy. I continue with the rest of my prayer, pleading for relief from my trial. And throughout the rest of the day, I don't feel much different. The next morning, I do it again. 3 things I'm grateful for at the beginning of my prayer. This goes on for several days. It's easy to come up with things that I'm grateful for at the beginning, but as the days stretch into weeks, it gets harder and harder to not repeat what I have previously thought of. I begin to catch myself thinking of things during the day that I can count for the next morning's prayer. My brain has started collecting evidence for me. Gradually, over time, I feel less like a victim of my circumstance and start feeling like I'm actually pretty lucky and blessed. This is a shock. My circumstances have not changed at all. All the same stuff is happening. What I realize is that instead of gathering evidence that my life is hard and miserable and scary, my brain has shifted into gathering evidence that my life is good and blessed and rich. I find that I can breathe again. I find that instead of going through my days heavy and worried, I feel lighter and more optimistic. As I continue to practice radical gratitude, I become happier and more relaxed. I'm completely surprised by this. It's just like the state president said. My situation has not changed, but my perception about my life has. And that has changed everything. Well, that happened over 10 years ago. And I still practice radical gratitude every single morning during my prayer. I realize that the trial you are experiencing may likely be very different from the one I just described. But the thing about radical gratitude is it doesn't matter what the source of your pain is. It works for every trial. It seems too simple, doesn't it? I thought so too. How can being grateful relieve the pain you're experiencing over your loved ones leaving the church? It almost sounds ridiculous. But like the Israelites who exercised faith in the simple instruction to look at the serpent on the pole in order to be healed, something that required effort on their part and seemingly didn't make much sense at all for what they were experiencing. So exercising radical gratitude will shift your brain and your perception about your situation in a way that can bring peace and relief to your soul. I know, because I've tried it and it worked. I had nothing to lose, and neither do you. But Shiree, you might be saying, how can you never come up with the same thing twice? And how can you remember what you've already said thanks for and what you haven't? I was once asked this question, and here is what you do. You get very, very specific. For example, I'm so grateful that I slept well last night. I'm so grateful that I have money in my checking account and I can go to the store and buy this, and this that I need today. I'm so grateful that I got to see my mom before she went off on her trip. Stuff like that. Very, very specific to your day. And as you start to do this, your brain will start collecting evidence. I later discovered another piece of this that helps even on a deeper level, and that's to express gratitude for whatever is currently causing you pain. For example, I was working at a wound clinic as a nurse. It was a pretty toxic environment. It was painful to be there. There was a lot of hard things going on. It wasn't very fun. So I started looking for gratitudes specifically about what was causing my pain. I started looking for gratitudes about my job. And I realized that not everything was bad and negative. Like I had some coworkers that I totally enjoyed working with. I became grateful for each one of those individually. And I would even look and watch them and say, and think, what am I grateful for about this coworker? And I could get really specific on that. I also realized that I loved my patients. I had such great people that I got to help take care of, and I felt a great amount of love for them and gratitude that they were in my space and that I got to know them. I realized that I felt like I was doing something meaningful that made a difference, and I was grateful to have that opportunity. And I had lots of walking sometimes on my job. And I became grateful for the ability to do all that walking. First of all, to have a healthy body to do it. And second of all, to get exercise while I was at work. It was great. As I started looking for things to be grateful for, my brain kept bringing me more and more good things about my job until eventually the misery that I felt about going there dissipated. And I truly felt happy and grateful to be there. Bonnie D. Parkin said, in the scriptures, we learn that those who murmur do not know the dealings of that God who created them. The Lord counsels us not to murmur because it's then difficult for the Spirit to work with us. Gratitude inspires happiness and carries divine influence. Unquote. A couple of scriptures I want to share with you. Doctrine and Covenants 59 verse 7 says, thou shalt, doesn't that sound like the beginning of a commandment? Thou shalt thank the Lord thy God in all things. Thou shalt thank the Lord thy God in all things. That sounds like something God is instructing us to do. He's inviting us to practice gratitude. 1 Thessalonians 5:18 says, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. I believe that when God asks us to do something, there's a reason that's going to lead to our happiness. David O. McKay observed, we find in the bitter chill of adversity the real test of our gratitude, end quote. The bitter chill of our adversity, and in it we can find the real test of our gratitude. Dieter F. Uchtdorf, in his talk, Grateful in Any Circumstance, says, sooner or later, I believe that all of us experience times when the very fabric of our world tears at the seams, leaving us feeling alone, frustrated, and adrift. It can happen to anyone. No one is immune. Everyone's situation is different, and the details of each life are unique. Nevertheless, I have learned that there is something that would take away the bitterness that may come into our lives. There's one thing we can do to make life sweeter, more joyful, even glorious. We can be grateful. Why does God command us to be grateful? So there it is. It is a commandment. Why does God command us to be grateful? He's not just out there throwing out random commandments with no reason. This is what Dieter F. Uchtdorf says about it. All of his commandments are given to make blessings available to us. Commandments are opportunities to exercise our agency and receive blessings. Our loving Heavenly Father knows that choosing to develop a spirit of gratitude will bring us true joy and great happiness. So why does God command us to be grateful? Because He knows that a spirit of gratitude will bring us true joy and great happiness. Dieter F. Uchtdorf continues, it's easy to be grateful for things when life seems to be going our way. But what then of those times when what we wish for seems to be far out of reach? Could I suggest that we see gratitude as a disposition, a way of life that stands independent of our current situation? In other words, I'm suggesting that instead of being thankful for things, we focus on being thankful in our circumstances, whatever they may be. Being grateful in times of distress does not mean that we are pleased with our circumstances. It does mean that through the eyes of faith, we look beyond our present day challenges. This is not a gratitude of lips, but of the soul. It's a gratitude that heals the heart and expands the mind. What gratitude will do for you? So from the few quotes that I have read in the scriptures, what gratitude will do for you is, according to the apostles and prophets, we can receive true joy and great happiness as we exercise gratitude. Also, it will heal your heart and expand your mind. It will bring divine influence more strongly into your life. It allows you to carry the Spirit with you. I want these things. I think you do too. I want true joy and great happiness. I want my heart to be healed more than anything That's so important. I want divine influence. I want to feel like I have the Spirit with me. And so I invite you to tap into these wonderful blessings from God by practicing radical gratitude. Pick a time of day to do this. You can have it stack it with morning prayer. You could have it stack it with evening prayer. You could do it at lunch. You figure out what works for you, but pick a time. And you can do it during prayer, or you can do it not during prayer, or you can start a journal, a gratitude journal. And I invite you to pick something super specific that you're going to look for gratitudes about. With your loved one who's leaving the church and it's so hard, maybe you look for all the good in that. And I can hear you immediately being like, there is no good in that. How could I be grateful for anything in that realm? I get it. I get it. I was there. I understand. It feels like it's all bad and there's no silver lining and there's nothing good. I get it. But there is. I know because I've done it. Let me give you a little example. You have a teenage son who's leaving the church. He's belligerent, he's hostile, and he wants to move out because he's tired of having religion shoved down his throat, he says. Now, where's the gratitude in that? As I was in a situation like this, I found things to be grateful for. I became grateful that that child was in my space and I still had the opportunity to develop a relationship with them in a better way. I became grateful when they came home every night, safe and sound. I became grateful for every positive interaction with that child. I became grateful that as I prayed for that child and what did they need, that God brought ideas to my mind that actually said, I love you to him. And I became grateful that I was able to carry out those things. That's just a few. I could go on and on. There is gratitude that can be expressed even in this hard situation of having our loved ones leave the church. So instead of feeling like this is a bad time in your life, and instead of being miserable like I was, you can feel great happiness. You can feel true joy. You can heal your heart, or God can, through your keeping the commandment of gratitude. You can feel God's divine influence in your life as you let the fear go and as you open up to gratitude. It's so simple. Like the serpent on the pole to the Israelites. It's so simple. And it really works. I invite you to try it. If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, please share it with a friend who is working through a hard challenge. And please join me again next time for another episode of Just Love Them.